The beginning of us. They met when the world still felt wide and full of dreams. Michael was a young man with quiet eyes and big plans. Grace was laughter, loud, free, and full of life. Their story didn't start like a movie. It started simply, like all real things do. They met at a friend's gathering. Michael was sitting in a corner, sketching something on a napkin. Grace walked in, sunlight following her like it knew she belonged in it. "You draw?" she asked with a smile. "Sometimes, mostly when I don't know what to say," he replied shyly. "Well, say something then," she teased. That was the first spark, awkward, clumsy, but honest. From that day, coffee dates turned into long evening walks, and long evening walks turned into something deeper. That quiet comfort of being seen, really seen, by someone. They were young and fearless, but life, as it always does, had its lessons waiting. Grace dreamed of becoming a teacher. Michael wanted to be an architect. They both dreamed big, but the world wasn't kind to dreamers. Bills came, opportunities didn't. Their love was tested not by heartbreak, but by hardship. One night, sitting on the floor of their small apartment, Grace whispered, "Michael, maybe we should take a break, just until things get better." Michael looked at her, tired but steady. "No, I don't want to love you when things are easy. I want to love you now, while it's hard." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. That night she cried, not from sadness, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And so they stayed. They built their love like a house with their own hands, not perfect, but strong enough to stand through every storm. Years passed. They moved into a small apartment, one window, one old couch, and one dream they refused to give up on. They laughed more than they argued. And when they did argue, they always found their way back, because pride never won in their home. "You snore too loud," Grace would say, laughing. "And you steal the blanket," Michael would reply. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was enough. As the world outside kept changing, their little world stayed the same, full of warmth, chaos, and love that grew in quiet corners. Every love story begins somewhere. Theirs began with laughter, patience, and a promise that no matter what came, they'd face it together. Time moved faster than they expected. What started as long talks and laughter turned into routines, responsibilities, and silence. Michael began working longer hours, trying to build his architecture career. Grace started teaching at a nearby school. Their dreams were still alive, but somewhere between the noise of living, they stopped hearing each other. There were mornings when Michael would leave before Grace woke up, and nights when she would fall asleep before he got home. Their love didn't end, it just got quiet. One evening as they sat at dinner, Grace finally said what had been sitting in her heart for months. "Michael, do you even see me anymore?" He looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean us, Michael. We don't talk like we used to. We don't laugh. I feel like we're strangers living in the same house." Michael sighed. "Grace, I'm doing all this for us, for the future, for everything we said we wanted." She looked at him, her eyes tired. "But what's the point of building a future if we're losing the present?" The room went silent. That night they didn't argue. They just sat in the quiet, realizing how far apart they'd drifted while still being under the same roof. Days turned into months. Michael's job offered him an opportunity in another city, a chance to finally design something meaningful. He didn't want to leave Grace, but they both knew he couldn't say no. "Go," she said softly, holding his hand. "If it's meant to be, love will wait." He nodded, kissed her forehead, and left the next morning. Distance has a strange way of testing love. At first they called every night, then it became every few days. Soon, messages got shorter, calls went unanswered, and silence grew between them again. Grace tried to stay strong. She buried herself in work, smiled for her students, and tried to believe that love could survive distance. But at night, when the house was too quiet, she missed the sound of Michael's keys in the door. She missed the way he'd hum when he couldn't sleep. Months later, Grace found out Michael wasn't coming home as soon as he'd promised. He'd taken on another project, another delay, another promise to make it up to her. When they finally met again after almost a year, something in her had changed. "You look different," Michael said softly. "So do you," she replied. "I guess distance changes people." They sat in the living room, surrounded by the same furniture but a different kind of silence. It wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. Grace looked at him with a quiet sadness. "Do you still love me, Michael? Be honest." He took a deep breath. "I never stopped, Grace. I just forgot how to show it." Tears filled her eyes. "Then show me now, before it's too late." That night they talked for hours, about the years, the distance, the pain neither of them spoke of. And for the first time in a long while, they listened. Truly listened. Love, they realized, isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about finding your way back after them. They promised each other something simple: to try again. To start small. Dinners together, walks in the park, laughter before bed. To remember why they began. And slowly, love returned. Not with fireworks, but with peace. The kind of peace that comes from forgiveness and growth. Michael started leaving small notes before work. "Don't forget breakfast," or "You looked beautiful this morning." Grace began packing his lunch again, the way she used to. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and for them, that was enough. Years later, when they looked back, they realized that season of distance wasn't the end of their love. It was what made it stronger. Because love that survives the storm doesn't go back to what it was. It becomes something deeper, quieter, but unbreakable. Time, as it always does, moved quietly. Seasons changed. Their hair turned gray, and their hands, once smooth and steady, began to shake. But the way they looked at each other never changed. Michael and Grace had spent decades together by then. Their home was filled with memories, old photographs on the walls, laughter echoing through rooms that had seen both joy and sorrow. They still had their little morning rituals. Grace would wake first, make tea, and sit by the window. Michael would join her, still half asleep, just to hold her hand and watch the world wake up. "Remember when we used to rush everything?" Grace asked one morning, smiling softly. "We were always in a hurry to grow up, to make it," Michael replied. "We didn't realize we already had everything that mattered." Grace chuckled. "We were young. We thought love was something you chase. But it's not. It's something you build, and keep building." They didn't have the energy for long walks anymore, but they had each other, side by side on the porch, wrapped in quiet comfort. Sometimes they'd sit in silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they no longer needed words. Every wrinkle on their faces told a story, of sleepless nights, of laughter, of tears that turned into strength. One afternoon, Grace found an old photo album. The first picture inside was of them, young, wild, and smiling at the camera like they could live forever. She showed it to Michael and said softly, "Look at us. We really thought we knew what love was." He smiled. "Maybe we didn't, but we learned." Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. "And we kept learning, every day, even when it hurt." That night, as they prepared for bed, Michael took her hand. He held it for a long moment, tracing the lines that time had drawn across her skin. "Grace, do you regret anything?" he asked quietly. She thought for a while, then shook her head. "No, we made mistakes, sure, but even those brought us here, and here is good, here is enough." Michael smiled. "You were always my home, Grace. No matter where we were or how far I went, it was always you." Her eyes filled with tears. "And you were my peace, Michael, even when you drove me crazy." They both laughed softly, that kind of laughter that comes from a lifetime of love. Years went by, slower and softer now. Their children visited often, filling the house with noise again. And every time someone asked Grace the secret to their long marriage, she'd smile and say, "We didn't give up on each other, even when it would have been easier to walk away." Love, for them, had become more than a feeling. It was a choice, one they kept making, every single day. One quiet evening, the sun painted the sky in shades of gold. Grace sat beside Michael, her head resting on his shoulder. Each other every day. Till the wrinkles bloom, their love never withered. "Ain, you remember what you told me that night?" she whispered. Michael smiled faintly. "Which night?" "There were many. The one when I wanted to leave. You said, 'I don't want to love you when things are easy. I want to love you while it's hard.'" Michael chuckled softly. "Did I really say that? Sounds wiser than I remember being." Grace laughed gently. "You did, and you meant it." The two sat quietly for a while. The light outside dimmed, and the room grew soft and calm. Michael looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Grace, thank you for staying." She turned to him, eyes warm and gentle. "There was never anywhere else I wanted to be." And in that silence, full, peaceful, eternal, they just sat there, fingers entwined, hearts still in rhythm after all those years. Their love had outlasted everything, the arguments, the distance, the years, even the silence. Because love like that doesn't fade, it settles deep, like roots that refuse to let go. And though time kept writing its story on their faces, their hearts stayed the same. Still full, still strong, still choosing.